a Superversive Livestream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with Anthony Marquetta, my usual co-host. Anthony, where are you doing today?
Gesundheit.
Thank you. Uh, what we're going to talk about today is just sort of our guest in the show. We're going to talk about psychic phenomena, video essays, Super Eyepatch Wolf, and kind of normie slop in general. Because I've been purging my slop, Anthony. Purging.
I don't know what that means, and I kind of don't want to, so
I am
nice.
curating my internet experience. I am bringing myself to fruition through not feeding at the slop trough of the internet. It's very difficult. It is a lot of slop, and sometimes even very good slop.
I get you. I get you.
Mm-hmm. But me and Anthony were discussing Super Eye Patch Wolf's psychic video, and Anthony, you had a bombshell stop the presses about opinion about it.
Yeah. I didn't think this when I first saw it. I thought it was an amazing video when I first saw it, but
Mm.
over time, as I've learned more about what he talks about, I've come to realize that that video of Eyepatch Wolves is not that great.
There we go. That's a sigh. A gasp I wanted.
There you go. Got it. Uh, yeah, it's okay. So it's not a bad video either. However, I would describe it as misleadingly presented. So I've watched it a few times. I don't remember the last time I did, but it was at least months ago. But I've watched it more than once. I go on. I have and have had in the past long commutes, which require long videos to keep me awake. And Eyepatch Wolf is a very good speaker, so he often fits the bill. Which is if you're wondering why I would watch the same video more than once. Uh, it's not that autistic, I swear. Anyway,
It is.
it's only a little autistic.
It
Uh,
is.
anyway, so the point is, the video is about him exposing the psychic industry as fraudulent. So there is a sense in which what he is talking about is completely correct, right?
Mm.
Like the industry is very, very bad, is the best way that I could describe it, to be honest with you. Uh,
Yes.
right? Like it is abusive, but there's a lot of misleading things that he left out of the video, I would put it. For example, he has a long section on psychics and police work. Uh, but that section was actually presented in a very misleading way. For one thing, what he doesn't tell you is that the use of psychics in police work is actually industry standard, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
he is referring to psychics who are clearly actually frauds, right? And the clearly actually fraud psychics are giving nonsense gibberish answers that they've pulled out of I'm going to be polite and say a hat, right?
Yes.
And these are the ones that, like, okay, well, it didn't lead to anything, right? This is true, but what he's not telling you is that psychics are used by the police regularly, and they do actually come up with answers that are helpful quite a lot. The police aren't in the habit of, like, and I know that, like, you can insert your jokes here, but I'm trying to be, like, very straightforward about this, right? The police aren't in the habit of just, like, we're gonna keep doing this even though it doesn't work even slightly,
Mm-hmm.
systematically over the course of large swaths of geography in areas that have nothing to do with each other. This doesn't work and has never worked, and we're just going to keep doing it. Like, no, that's not how that happens, right? You can
Right.
insert your jokes here about the police, and they're often like, Wendigoon brings this up a lot. A lot of the time, law enforcement is way more incompetent than you realize, because of TV and movies. I
Mm-hmm.
get that, but this is a little bit different than like incompetence. This is like they would need to, over the course of decades, in geographical areas that have nothing to do with each other, all collectively agree to keep doing something that just simply does not work. So, what I am saying is sometimes it does work. And you might go, well, is it enough to overcome random chance? Well, I don't have the statistics in front of me, and if we had planned this in advance, I actually probably would have looked this up. But the answer is that sometimes when you see the predictions, it is pretty obvious that's not random chance. The Catholic apologist Jimmy Akin has a show called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which is not an apologetic show. It's just him discussing like unusual phenomena. Uh, and he interviewed a psychic who actually was played a very big role in taking down a serial killer. Like, and when you listen to her, I mean, she could have been lying about her predictions, I suppose, because I didn't have the records in front of me, right? But if she wasn't lying, then it's pretty obvious that what she was saying was clearly not random chance.
Right.
Like, you would need to. It wouldn't make any sense if it was random chance. She was making very deliberate, helpful, right, and relevant predictions and things about this guy. Uh, and there's also the fact that like so Eyepatch Wolf kind of skews what he's talking about to be like, sometimes psychics hire themselves out to the police. Well, no, this is actually like a known thing in law enforcement. Like they do this, right? It's not just a random, psychics will sometimes do that. Um, the other thing that he is not entirely correct about is when he says that there is no proof of any form of psychic activity. Um, and he just kind of blankets it as like, I wish it were true, but there's just no evidence for it. But that's not actually true either, right?
Mm-hmm.
I believe again it was like Jimmy Akin on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World was talking about this, and there have been peer-reviewed scientific studies. Again, if I were planning this in advance, I would have looked up those episodes and I would have found the studies he was talking about because he has talked about them before. Like he's quoted them, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
where telekinesis or I'm sorry, not telekinesis. Basically, precognition
Yes.
was coming true at greater than random chance, right? Remote viewing was shown to be true. So this is like attempting to view something that's not in your field of vision, right? Like that's in a different place and sometimes even different time. That this was coming true at beyond random chance. So he mentions the famous, like, the U.S. Army program, the Men Who Stare at Goats program type of thing, right? Which is, the U.S. Army tried to see if they could use psychics to kill people, basically. Uh, the answer is no. Like, psychic power just doesn't work that way. I will say, though, that, like, sometimes the program results are misleading. The way that Eyepatch Wolf made it sound and the way he presented it in the video was that the only people who were fooled by the results were people who went into it wanting to be fooled and that it didn't give a statistically significant result. But actually, I think it would be more accurate to say that it did give results that were better than random chance in the US Army tests, but they weren't consistent enough to be useful to the military, which is different than saying that it gave nothing beyond random chance, right?
Right.
Uh, so there's that as well, and the way he presented it was like kind of misleading. There's also the fact that he lionizes in the video, and he really does. Like, he doesn't present him with any nuance whatsoever. I think he literally calls him like a goddamn hero at one point. I'm quoting the video, right? Like a
Mm-hmm.
man named James Randi. So James Randi, you can look him up. He was a magician, the amazing Randi. Randi. He presents him as he had a rivalry with a psychic named Uri Geller. Now, Uri Geller is a garbage human, right? He absolutely deserves all of the hate he has ever gotten. Fun fact, he sued the Pokemon Company because the Pokemon Alakazam was clearly based on him.
Clearly.
Yeah,
That
that's
yellow
real.
dwarf thing with the
With the
giant
spoons.
mustache and the spoons and the.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I see it. I understand.
Uh, yeah, Uri Geller sued the Pokemon Company for this. It's really funny. Uh, Uri Geller is a garbage human. He is an absolute fraud. He is a completely awful person. He has been exposed on national TV. The Johnny Carson show, I believe, completely exposed
Mm-hmm.
him. So, and that was like largely the doing of James Randi, who, according to Eyepatch Wolf, said, "When I die, I want to be made into ashes and have them blown in Uri Geller's eyes." Which is metal, and I
Mm-hmm.
respect it.
Brutal.
What was that?
Brutal.
Yeah. Uh, he also had the $1 million paranormal challenge, offered a prize of $1 million to applicants who could demonstrate any paranormal, supernatural, or occult power or event under test conditions agreed to by both parties. That makes me think of a famous G.K. Chesterton quote, where Chesterton points out that when psychics tell you, and I'm very, very broadly paraphrasing, the real quote is much more poetic, Chesterton, but uh, he says something along the lines of that when a psychic tells you that they can't do a certain thing because they're being watched or under, like, conditions of testing, that actually they might be telling the truth. And, like, it's not at all an unusual thing for them to be saying. Like, Chesterton makes this point. So, I'm not. His challenge does not convince me particularly.
Mm.
So, anyway, Randy was a magician, so he knew how a lot of, like, the fake psychic stuff worked. Here's the thing, though, about the amazing Randy. Uh, he's actually a horrible person. So he was a believer in a lot of social Darwinist theories. This is Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is like just like it's prompting my memory, right?
Yes.
Like I didn't get it from Wikipedia. I heard it from other sources. I'm using Wikipedia to prompt my memory. Actually, Wikipedia is trying really hard to downplay it, which is funny. Like it has one line. So, social Darwinism, for those who don't know, is an evil, evil philosophy.
Yep.
Literally, survival of the fittest.
Yep.
He denounced social Darwinism in 2013. That means, like, when was he born? 1928. He died in 2016. So he was 89 years old when he finally said he wasn't a social Darwinist, which, like, good for him, I guess, but a little late. So he also, in a really disturbing thing to me, and Ben will know why when I say it, he was inspired to come out as gay by seeing the 2008 biographical drama film Milk. Milk is a movie about a pedophile.
Harvey Milk.
Yep. Like, I'm not even kidding. It is a movie about a pedophile. It glorifies and lionizes an actual pedophile.
Yep.
So that's disturbing, especially when James Randi was also accused of that. It never went anywhere, but it makes you wonder. Like, but besides this, you also hear, like, he believed that religions and all religion were basically in, like, the same category as the psychic phenomena that he was debunking.
Right.
Compared the Bible to the Wizard of Oz, called himself a bright, which is absolutely insane. Like, that's a real thing that people actually did at one time and thought it was, like, okay. Uh,
A bright?
that's
What's a
yeah.
bright?
Oh, like the bright was like a term that the new atheists came. Like we're bright people, we're bright, like a light in the
Ah,
darkness. So he called
nerds.
himself a bright. Was like a new atheist thing. He uh he quotes Daniel Dennett as his his spiritual guide. Basically, he says when he asks if he was religious, he refers to a Daniel Dennett essay. Um, which like Daniel Dennett is a horrible philosopher. Edward Fazer has exposed him multiple times. He said some interesting things, and sometimes he was wrong in interesting ways. He also has a great short story that I'll share with you later, Ben. That's about like a guy who hooks up his he needs to go into an area with dangerous radiation, so his brain remote controls his body as he goes into the area, and then it raises all sorts of philosophical questions. Great short story. Terrible philosopher. So yeah, he was a new atheist. Like that's what he was, and I am of the opinion, and I am sure that you are as well, that the new
Hmm.
atheists are some of the stupidest people ever to walk planet Earth.
Oh yeah.
That they are literally like when I was in high school and I was an idiot, right?
Hmm.
Uh, I heard what they were saying, and nobody really had good answers to them that I knew in person, right?
Right.
So they kind of bothered me. And then I looked into it, and this is why I have so much respect for Edward Fazer and bring him up a lot, because Edward Fazer did the correct thing, which is that he really didn't take them seriously. He responded to their arguments seriously, but his responses were always, "This is literally the stupidest shit I've ever seen. Uh, how do people believe this? They should be ashamed of themselves." That sort of thing, right? Like he would give robust philosophical responses that were basically like, seriously, these are really stupid. Um, Also, I'm just I'm reading his story, and some of it is absolutely like insane. Like the fact that the man he married, a Venezuelan artist, uh,
Amazing.
Alvarez, who was then known as Pena, had left his native land in fear of his life after being threatened for being homosexual. The alias Pena used was already an actual person in the United States. The identity confusion can cause the real Alvarez some legal and financial difficulties. Pena was arrested for identity theft and faced deportation. Uh, so that's insane. It has
Okay.
nothing to do with what I'm talking about, really, but like, yeah, that's nuts. Uh, Anyway, all of this is to say that the amazing Randy, yes, he did good work in exposing psychics. He was also like a new atheist nut job, uh, and he was a social Darwinist who believed in survival of the fittest up until he was 88. So, you know, like the fact that he calls him a goddamn hero and does not qualify it in any way is deeply misleading. Like James Randi, I would describe as not a very good person. Right? Like,
Hmm.
there's also the weird stuff with him coming out as gay because he was inspired by a movie about a pedophile. Uh, Granted that the movie doesn't talk about the pedophilia, but like, it's a Google search away. You know,
Hmm.
really not hard to find. This is
It's
it's not a
almost.
conspiracy theory.
It's like it's not subtext. It's just text.
Yeah, he acknowledged his homosexuality in adolescence, but secretly pursued sexual relationships well into adulthood. Da, da, da. Yeah, it's bad.
It's bad.
It's real
Yeah.
bad.
It's like there's how do I want to put it? Like for a lot of these guys, especially like the show business guys, it's like everything that you do and you find with them is like, oh yeah, it's fake, and he's a sexual degenerate. Like people bring this stuff up all the time, especially when it's politically, viable for them to do so. Like there's a guy, Mike Kearns, who's done a lot of good work against games journalists and stuff like that. Neil. Now, for context, the biggest art controversy of any kind, including video games and painting and all this jazz, is Neil Gaiman's absolutely horrendous track record with women to the point where they're like, okay, just make sure he doesn't touch any of the young ones in the camps that he was holding. That's how bad it was. They had like protocols for it. Uh, they go after Mike Kearns because people started sending him suggestive images of the lolly variety, and then he'd be like, "Yes, I like the belly buttons best." Yes, absolutely. Kind of weird, disgusting. Would not put it on my Twitter account. However, do you think that these people are going after Neil Gaiman? Not on your life. Not on your absolute life. They would rather fall on their swords like a Roman than attack somebody who's politically inconvenient to attack. So if you wondered why, like if you ever wonder why someone like the Amazing Randy or whatever can survive, all this weird stuff being a social Darwinist, and all this other stuff, it's because of that. It was politically expedient for them to attack a different fraud than the literal. Well, I shouldn't say he's a literal Nazi, but the guy who's espousing social Darwinism. There's an inequality to this. He was a legitimate attack dog, and he earned his piece, but he probably wouldn't make it in our current year.
By the
Uh,
way, I've been researching Harvey Milk to figure out like where'd the pedophilia thing? Yeah, it's there.
oh,
You
it's
gotta
there.
dig a bit.
Well, they
It's
bury it. It was a lot more
Yeah,
obvious a few
they
years
bury
ago.
it. Jack McKinley. He was a 16-year-old runaway
Mm-hmm.
who was living in Greenwich Village, and Milk was 34. Like, it's really weird to go. Their relationship has long been a source of controversy. Like, you
No.
fucking think? Uh,
Hey,
no,
guy.
the weird thing, though, like, apparently at the time, he technically was above the weirdly low New York age of consent, which was raised later, but, like, it was 14 at the time,
Oh.
and he was 16. But I really want you, like, leave that aside and think about this. A politician from California was in a secret relationship with a homeless 16-year-old boy in Greenwich Village.
Yep.
Does that sound appropriate in like any world?
Absolutely not. It's
Like it's insane. Uh,
Yep.
but yeah, there you go. So I did find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. My point is that James Randi, like, and going back to Eyepatch video, his information is presented in a somewhat in a biased way. He is trying to make the point that psychics are frauds. The problem with this is that he is painting all psychics in exactly the same way. But that's not true. Now, the argument is that, well, if there were psychics that weren't frauds, wouldn't they actually be major celebrities and really famous? Well, no. The problem with that is that real psychic work just isn't as flashy, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be the sort of thing. For example, I've seen an interview with a guy who did remote viewing for the military to find drugs on ships, and the military attempted to bury his role in it to an extent, not to the point where like he was allowed to speak publicly about it, but like he was doing the interview. It's not like they threatened to kill him or anything. But they tried to bury like the documents mentioning Kim are all redacted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Presumably because they're embarrassed that they were doing this, right? Uh,
Right.
but at the same time, it's like, well, wouldn't this guy be super famous? Well, no, as he would describe it, like remote viewing is difficult to use, needs specific circumstances, can be kind of vague, right? Like you would need to
Mm-hmm.
know exactly what you're looking for. With that said, it is very clearly giving him answers that are beyond random chance, right?
Yes.
Like, there's no question that what he, if he's telling the truth, obviously, he could be lying, but if he's telling the truth, there is no question that this is a useful and real skill, right? Like, it
Mm-hmm.
is remote viewing. Uh, there
Well,
was
it's
someone who talked about a religious experience. He was not told who to look for. He was given a description, and he saw Jesus of Nazareth, like actual Jesus Christ, who looked at him and acknowledged him, which he claimed was very unusual in remote viewing, which is wild because it's like that time travel meme to me. You know what I'm talking about, where Jesus
oh
turns to
yes,
the time
yes,
traveler and says in perfect English, "Go home." Uh,
right.
it reminded me of that, and he's like, Jesus didn't do that, but he did look at me, and it was like I said, and I knew that he saw some worse thing. He saw people worse than me, and he saw people better than me, but he just accepted me as I was at the moment, and he gave me a look. And when I went back, I told them, I don't know who you're looking for, but this guy is not guilty of whatever you think he is. And then they showed me that it was Jesus, right?
Right.
Uh, Now, did that happen? I mean, that's a vague enough thing that who really knows, right? Like,
Right.
it's a little too vague. On the other hand, I don't discount it,
I
right?
mean,
Like,
we know people who have explicitly stated that they, John C. Wright, namely,
yeah,
they've seen Jesus and he, was there with Mary and all this jazz, and it's like, we can't deny the real experience. By the way, our guest did get back in touch with us, and we will cut over to him at 7 o'clock Central, uh, give or take, give or
nice,
take.
cool.
I'll send you the
So,
link.
who is our guest? Because I learn everything the day of shows.
Alex Wisner. He is doing a comic about Wrangel, the general of the White Russians, for the Royals.
Cool.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool. Anyway,
I'm interested.
it's a pretty good
I'm
comic.
glad he got back to us because it's like a meme on this show.
It is a meme. Anyway, what were we talking
Yeah,
about?
going to Eyepatch Wolf though generally, that video was like you need to learn more about it to understand the problems with it. And I'm not saying that the video was entirely wrong. He's completely correct that there is like a scam industry of psychics that exploits people. It's really cruel. This is why like I despise shows like the Long Island Medium, stuff like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing, absolute nonsense, complete garbage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, these people who he was exposing who were like taking advantage of grieving families and and grieving people who were desperate to see their loved ones again, like he's completely correct about that. Like that's
Oh yeah.
absolutely evil. Evil, evil, evil. Uh, right? Like they
Yes.
deserve all of the contempt that they get. Uh, and he is correct that it turned into a big business, which is often a sign that something is that you're not seeing at the very least the full picture of something, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it turns into a big business, a machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cold reading is a real thing, so it's hot reading as they
Yep.
call it.
I mean, I do that
So
myself as a bouncer. Like, I'll look at somebody, somebody's complaining to me, oh, why do I gotta give my ID? Oh yeah, you're clearly 27. I know they're not 27. And it turns out, oh yeah, they're not 27. In fact, they're 22, and they need to stop complaining. It's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, you can read anybody for anything. But the thing is, you gotta keep it in its proper place. Uh, you
I
know,
mean,
you,
it's really just Sherlock Holmes type analysis, which is an absolutely real thing that you can learn, by the way.
yep.
Uh, Not the cartoon magic stuff that you see on like the modern Sherlock, but what Holmes does in the stories is quite learnable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, which, by the way, Conan Doyle in the original stories immediately acknowledges in A Study in Scarlet. uh, which is a pet peeve of mine. That people are like, "Oh, Sherlock's like a super genius that can never be imitated." Holmes himself, in the original stories, did not take this position, right? Like, he
Mm-hmm.
did not believe that he was one of a kind and could never be imitated. He talks to Watson about a protege he basically has in France, who he claims has the same level of deduction abilities that he does, but only lacked his encyclopedic knowledge of crime. Uh,
Yep.
so yeah, like what I'm trying to say is it's what you're describing and what cold reading actually is a form of like that Sherlock Holmes style immediate deduction. You notice small details about a person, you play probabilities, which Holmes again would readily admit in the stories that a lot of what he's doing is just playing probabilities, right? It's not 100% certain, but he's taking an educated guess based on the data he sees, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and then it makes him look like a psychic, right? Now, Holmes was not trying to pretend to be psychic. He was just trying to be smart. you know. So he would explain how he did it, and then he would complain that people would call it simple, which
Mm-hmm.
I always found really funny because I've always, after his explanation, I was like, that was in no way simple. That was very impressive. What are you talking about? Uh, but then he would be like, yeah, it just makes it really takes out the magic. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. I'm still impressed.
Right.
But okay. Um, yeah, the point is, it's an absolutely learnable skill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there are books on the subject you can learn how to do, and they don't call it cold reading, but that's what Holmes is doing, right?
Right.
Uh, that in fact, that's precisely what Holmes is doing. They call it Conan Doyle calls it deduction, which is also wrong. I think technically speaking, it would actually be induction.
Right.
What Holmes is doing, but yeah, whatever. Yeah, so Eyepatch Wolf, like he is correct about a lot of points, but I think that the in trying to make those points, he was misleading about the evidence for actual psychic and supernatural phenomenon. And this goes into a larger point of, number one, like my criticism of Eyepatch Wolf generally is that he it's really weird because he doesn't come across this way in that he is an extremely eloquent speaker and writer. He has especially for like storytelling, he has a gift for it, right? Like he's a very good storyteller.
Mm.
Uh, but he is aggressively normie in his opinions,
Right.
right?
It's
And
it's kind of like he's sort of like occasionally John C. Wright uses the phrase Mr. Flatland. He is not interested in things outside of his experience or ideas or mindset or anything like that. Like I think like let's say you meet on the street and you try to witness to him, like he just wouldn't be open to it. Like he just wouldn't get it. He'd be like, oh well, you have your beliefs and I have mine. It's like I met a Satanist last night in my bouncing gig, and she's clearly old. She's older than me. And she goes, yeah, I have to stay fresh for my Church of Satan thing tomorrow. And I go, oh, I didn't know we let in high schoolers.
that's pretty funny.
And she's like, well, I'm not,
Um,
and I think I actually misspoke and I said, well, I didn't realize, oh, atheism, huh? I didn't know we let in high schoolers. And she's like, I'm not an atheist, I'm a Satanist. I'm like, oh, well, still, same point. It's like one of these things where it's like no, like he's a flatlander. Like it's like this. Like people all over the world have reported dreams of things to come. Voices in their heads calling them to do great things. Expressions of will that come from basically nowhere. Like like
yep,
imagine ambition, right? Imagine having ambition to forge an empire. Imagine you're Napoleon. Imagine you're Caesar or Alexander. You just can't do it, right? Like no tech bro, no Peter Thiel type. Sorry to Peter Thiel if will listen to us for some awful reason. No, none of those types are an Alexander, a Caesar, or a Napoleon. Donald Trump is not anything like that as well, and then certainly no rival of his is either. Where does that come from? Does that come from nowhere? Does it come from some sort of uh, void? Does it just randomly appear in his breast? No, it bursts forth from a source outside of themselves. Divinely inspired, in my opinion. And some of them, like Constantine, literally so, the Great. Um, you, like, we can choose to sort of believe that the world is flat, quote unquote. But the thing is that doesn't change the fact that it's round. The spiritual nature of things are as important as the physical nature of things. Why
And
is the
more obvious, by the way.
and more obvious? For example, you look at a fat person. What does it mean that they're fat? If you were to ask someone like Eyepatch Wolf, you would say something like, "Well, it means that they probably, if he's actually willing to give you his real opinion, he would probably say something about eating disorders. Maybe they're depressed. Maybe they're this. Maybe they're that." Well, I would say that they are unable to unable to handle their gluttony. The gluttony is a besetting sin. They are physically bound by their appetites like chains. Fat is a literal chain around your body. And you might say, well, Ben, that's a little extreme. It's like, no, that's very real. You know, if you're
Right.
fat,
And it doesn't say that none of that other stuff plays into it, but it also doesn't take away the spiritual aspect, right? Like,
exactly.
because if you have the sorts of mental issues or that are leading you to be, we're talking like obese, right? Like morbidly obese,
We're not talking a gut. We're talking you are, to the point where you can't run. You are at the point where if somebody asked you to climb up some stairs or something like that, it would wind you and you'd have to rest. Everyone loses their breath while going upstairs, it's different. Like there's a certain
Right.
peevishness. If you're confused, watch videos about my 600-pound life. They
Yeah.
will tell you.
So my point being though that like when we talk about this, it's not to say that you don't need to overcome the various psychological and mental issues, right? But they're causing a sort of spiritual sickness, just like all sin, right? This is one of the discussion that we had with Brienne DeMarco, actually, when I mentioned about Alcoholics Anonymous, and I said, what was interesting is that the advice they give is basically just the advice you see Jesus give about all sin in the New Testament, right? Like, cut it out, literally pluck out your eye, not literally, actually, but you get what I mean. Like, pluck out your eye, chop off your hand if it means not sinning, right? And that's Alcoholics Anonymous. It's like literally, if seeing alcohol triggers you, then don't be around it, right? And it's the same like Matt Fradd talks about this with pornography. He's very, and I appreciate him because he's very open about it. He's like, I can't watch a movie that has any sort of physical titillation in it, right? Like at all. Like I can't do it.
Yeah.
And I actually appreciate that he says that because to say that you're not, it doesn't excuse that you sin, right? And Matt's not saying it as an excuse. He's saying it as I do what I have to now to not sin, and that means not watching that sort of media, right? Ever. And if I were to watch it and I did sin, I would still, right? Like I'm paraphrasing him now, but I would still be at fault.
Yes.
Right? And it's the same with like a glutton where you go like, okay, so you have all of these triggers and psychological issues that you do need to overcome, but it doesn't remove the spiritual fault that's at work there, right? Like it's things that and this goes, gluttony is one example, lust is another. So we're looking at it, from multiple strands here. When I say that Eyepatch Wolf is a normie, part of what I mean is that it's kind of subtle and it's a little surprising, but I want you to think back to all of the opinions that he's held. Are you surprised by his thoughts on anything?
Almost never.
I can't think of ever being surprised at what his opinion was. That's not to say that he's not very good at expressing it. He's extremely good at expressing it.
Mm.
It's not to say that he doesn't sometimes find things like in his streams that he's, his videos about his favorite things that I also like. He absolutely does, and sometimes turns me on to things. Uh, but I've never gotten the impression from him that I'm ever going to get a take that would potentially make anybody in the mainstream mad at him. You know who he reminds me of? He is like Jeff from Mother's Basement, one step up the sociosexual hierarchy.
That's impressive. That's absolutely astounding.
What do you mean?
Oh, that he's just one step. Because Jeff is an arch gamma. Like,
Jeff's a gamma, so
yeah,
that would make him. I
Delta.
would consider him low delta. I would consider Eyepatch Wolf, from what I've seen of him, low delta.
Okay, I'll accept that.
Which is now, to be fair here, like the sociosexual hierarchy, as Vox Day would point out, isn't itself a morality scale. Your morality is your actions, right? Like how
Mm-hmm.
you act. And being a delta is the norm. You're normally not encouraged to try and diagnose yourself, but I'm probably a delta, like, which I'm comfortable with saying. Certainly I have gamma tendencies like anybody else. But
Mm.
the point being that it's not necessarily an insult of him to say this, but the comparison was less about his social sexual hierarchy and more about the comparison to Mother's Basement, right? Jeff of
Yes.
Mother's Basement. Because I would imagine that he and Jeff agree on just about everything,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
All of their opinions. It just gives me the impression that like they would line up because that's what Jeff is as well, right?
Right.
Jeff's opinions are arch normie. He is an establishment shill. Now,
Right.
Jeff has his other
Everything he's ever
problems.
done, Digibro did first.
Yep. The big thing that always pissed me off, and that I've always been pounding this bell, was that he tried to make himself the Sword Art Online guy, which is just really scummy. Uh, because Digibro was absolutely the first to turn on Sword Art Online, and the backlash to Sword Art Online as a result of what Digibro started became so intense it created like a counter backlash of people who try to claim that Sword Art Online is actually good. Uh, it's not,
Right.
but
Well,
yeah,
it's something that like I sort of wanted to talk about, but I don't think we'll have enough time for a deep
no,
dive
we got
into it.
15 minutes.
Is the idea of like slop. I was looking at like Super Eyepatch Wolf. And slop is an internet slang that's developed in the last, I don't know, bit
Week or two.
week or two, more like a month, 3 months. But then I'm much more engaged, don't you know? Uh, where it's basically the idea of this is content for content's sake. Like I mentioned, go watch a my 600 pound life video. Well, guess what? Uh, my 600 pound life videos are slop. They are always slop. They are about human misery. Excuse me.
Oh
Maybe,
yeah,
maybe you can glean a little something about it. Like I find them useful because I go, Ben, if you don't control your eating, you're gonna look like this, and it's like aversion therapy. I find that if I'm feeling really bad about my diet and I want McDonald's or whatever, I pop on one of these videos and eat a rice cracker or something, and guess what? Those cravings go away every time. Wow. Who would have thought?
amazing.
Uh, but yeah, they just disappear. Um, And the thing uh slop, there we go. Um, excuse me, I'm trying to think about it. And the thing with this stuff is that what's the actual content being provided? Like the reason why, like Jeff versus Digibro, the reason why Digibro was always the greatest, the best, was because he actually had content in every single video. And if he didn't have content in the video, you kind of knew from the beginning that he wasn't going to have content. Like you could tell he was just throwing something out there. He made a video about fractal content that I can't get through because he fractally writes it out and then has video illustrations practically explaining his explanation in the background. It is an immensely complex video that I just can't get into. Even though I think it's probably has, a lot in there to give, it's too difficult. So it's like that's like the opposite of slop. Jeff would, or like something else, like this would just throw out minimal, basic commentary, something, wrong, libtard talking points, and then, hey, don't we all feel good? It's like I got into true crime for a half a minute because I started watching videos about Missouri true crime, and the thing that got me and that sort of pulled me out of it because it's very addictive is that all these videos would end with moral lessons. In other words, it wasn't. It was like like you watched it and you felt good about yourself because you weren't this crazed killer. Um, this is slop. It's like right now Elden Ring is not really collapsing, but it's not as good as it used to be, content wise, because guess what? People are making slop. People will actively say things that are wrong, countered by the lore. They're just throwing anything against the wall and earning 50,000 views. And it's not as easy as it used to be, but it's like, oh, this is disgusting. I don't want to watch these videos. Academic Agent decided that he was a slop account. So he's, decided that he's not putting out as much content as he used to. He's not doing the live streams about what's going on at this time. He's lowering the amount of content so that he can make his content more worthwhile. These things, and it's like, quite frankly, at this point, Anthony, I'm viewing Super Eyepatch Wolf as a slop account. What do you think of
A
that?
flop account, huh?
Slop account.
Slop.
Slop.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
Slop account.
Yes.
Hmm.
What is he providing in his last few videos? He has only done my favorite thing videos and that Fear and Hunger video, which, quite frankly, people were already talking about. So he was riding that normie wave.
Oh, and he wrote in a thing where he called the creators racist, and then got so much backlash he had to remove it from the video.
From Fear and Hunger? He called the Fear and Hunger people racist?
Oh yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, you don't know this story?
I skipped it, but...
Oh, so in the video, he has a line in passing where he goes like, the game's not like, in the little, the game's not perfect bit that every one of these videos always has, right?
Mm-hmm.
He has a moment where he says something like, and then there's the monster that is like, they find savages that are, monsters or something. I don't even remember what it was because I've never played Fear and Hunger and honestly have no interest in it.
Same.
It sounds like this exact sort of game I would hate. But not that I appreciate it for what it is, but I would never play it. Anyway, He mentioned something like, he goes, and if you don't see why this is problematic, then you're probably an unpleasant person and I don't want to be your friend or whatever. He got so much backlash as a bunch of people are going like, why, Eyepatch Wolf? Why are you saying that the monsters, the native monsters, must be a reference to a minority? Who said that? Nobody mentioned this. Why do you think that? And then you had to be like, well, come on. no. And then eventually he just like got so tired of it, he cut it out.
Right.
Um,
Well, is it like, I guess from what it sounds like, it's like one of those extra credits. Are the orcs black people?
yeah, exactly. Um, which is horrible and always was, but yeah, truly terrible. It was a horrible moment of the video. With that, I wouldn't call Eyepatch Wolf slop. He has a lot of stuff. I've learned things from his videos. His fake martial arts video, I found very good. Though obviously he could have been lying about that too. But on the other hand, I did know a little bit about the subject,
Mm,
so I could corroborate some of it, like the fact that very few martial arts actually work. Uh, like way less than you
not
think.
without contact, anyway.
Yeah, like the Aikido, for example, is a big one that I looked into for a while, and then I figured out that Aikido was a scam. Uh, it's a martial art that is based on using your opponent's momentum against you. Uh, it doesn't work. Like, just straight up does not work. That's not to say, some people try to salvage these things to turn it into something like Tai Chi, right? Basically
Right.
an exercise. But that's not what Aikido claimed to be. It claimed to be a martial art,
Well,
right?
so here's the thing with Aikido. Like, there are practitioners who are explicitly sparring. They are fighting. They are getting punched in the face. Guess what? If your martial art allows for you to get punched in the face, you're going to be a better fighter than the guy who does the fake martial art
Yeah,
that supposedly has a better reputation. So it's like, whatever these things are that people bring up, like Aikido and stuff like that, fake martial arts, often they're from like people who are just throwing up, no, we don't do contact. Well, look, if you're not doing contact martial arts, you're basically doing a dance, or you're a 5-year-old kid. If you're a 5-year-old kid, don't worry about it. If you're dancing, then you need to, actually just take dance classes because that'll be more worthwhile for you, and you might get, a girl or something.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, so there are martial arts that are very effective. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was found to be very effective. I think I've mentioned this before, by the way. The first Ultimate Fighting tournament, like, I want that to be turned into like an anime or something because it's such an amazing story. Uh, like
Yeah.
they literally just invited the top martial arts masters from every location, like from all around the world, to duke it out to see which martial arts was the best. And you literally had a family of people, the Royce Gracie, the Gracie family,
Mm.
uh, a family of people who had secretly developed a foreign martial version of jujitsu and had been developing it on their own for years, and then they use this despite being undersized to win the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Is that not some anime bullshit?
It's beautiful. I like it. Click on the link I sent you, Anthony.
I got it.
Uh, so yeah, and it's like, I don't pretend to be a martial artist or anything ridiculous like that. I'm clearly just a big dude who does bouncing. Uh, I'm going to leave Discord, Anthony.
I'm in Streamlab.
Okay,
I hope we're still on YouTube.
we should be. We should be. We'll fine. We're fine. We're fine. We're fine. We're fine. Anyway, uh, like with I'm trying to think here. Uh, like, yeah, no, that's fantastic stuff. I'm trying to think. I'm sorry, Anthony. I had a point. I
I
lost it.
forgive you.
Thank you. Uh, so like slop. Yeah, all right. So like there's some there. It's not like they people produce like bad videos. I mean good videos and are not slop. Like uh like there's videos that are like high class slop. like videos about Elden Ring archaeology. Guess what? Elden Ring archaeology is very cool and you can learn things about it, and I like it a lot, but it is slop. It is not useful for my life in any way. It's nothing that's connected uh, um, to real life except in archaeological techniques and things that, quite frankly, you could learn in a afternoon. Um, and a hundred other things like that. Welcome, Alex Weisner. Or is it Wisner? Can you hear us, sir?
Oh no. Oh no. Wow.
Anyway,
In exciting news,
just
Alex can't speak.
no,
It's
no.
Wisner. Hello.
Wisner,
Thank you.
thank you.
Hey,
I
Excellent.
can hear you.
welcome.
We are
Hello?
going to. Yes, can you hear us, sir?
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Hello. Hello.
Hold on a second.
No.
Anyway, so to pivot, something that isn't slop is the Always with Honor.
It's on my end. Hold on.
Is the Always with Honor Indiegogo that we're going to bring Alec Wisner on to talk about in a second.
Okay. Okay. It's
Can-
fixed.
Can you hear us?
I can hear you now.
Excellent. What is your opinion
Yay.
on slop, sir? Slop content on the internet.
Oh, we hate slop.
There we go. What a man. All right. So we're here with the comic artist Alex Wisner with the Always with Honor issue 1 Indiegogo. This is about General Pyotr Wrangel, the greatest hero of the Russian Civil War. I believe he was on the whites, right Russian sides, right?
Yes, sir.
And against the Bolsheviks, against the Reds. There's all kinds of interesting stuff here. We'll get a few opinions and then we'll dive into this. I was interested in this because I actually read a very old memoir on Project Gutenberg about a shill journalist who was sent to the Red Army and then wrote a book about it. And the funny thing about it is that he's like, yes, we're drinking tea and black bread, such a hearty meal. And like I thought about it for a second, and I'm like, he was just eating starvation rations the
Yeah.
entire time. We courageously had this fight. He's talking about all kinds of relatively miserable and horrible things, and putting a propagandistic spin on it. We got onions today, and they were very delicious. Like, thank you, sir. Please calm down. Instead, of course, we should respond with our own. Well, I wouldn't call it propaganda, because that would imply that there was any artistic merit with the other one. Whereas there is certainly plenty of artistic merit here. The art is what caught me, especially that first image of General Wrangel in his fur hat. Looks like talking to his troops, and the general motion and vitality of your images. Why don't you interrupt my wrangling and tell us about your experiences and your work, sir?
Well, I've never read that memoir that you mentioned, but that sounds pretty entertaining. I might have to give that a read. But yeah, I'm working on a comic adapting the memoirs of Peter Wrangel. He was a general, a leader of the White Army. Eventually, he was the supreme leader of the White Army, or what was left of them by the end of the Civil War. And by then, the damage had already been done. Victory was kind of hopeless at that point, but he did what he could, and he saved thousands of people's lives. Uh, Thousands of Russians who would have otherwise been tortured and executed at the hands of the Reds. He managed to evacuate them all from the Crimea,
Mm-hmm.
escape to the west.
Yeah.
And yeah, the story is pretty much all about him. Uh, but for my adaptation, I've decided to use external material to flesh out the story from other perspectives, such as the Tsar's own perspective.
Mm-hmm. So
Uh,
is the focus on sort of the historicity of it, or is it more of a sort of a character drama that you're pursuing?
it's more of a character drama. I think it's more. I think it would reach more people to present things in that way, in a sort
Yes.
of pop cultural way, uh, to make people more interested in the history and the hard facts.
Gotcha. Uh, okay. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of the events? We, of course, know that the Bolshevik Revolution took over, I believe, 1917. And of course, they weren't really a united front as people would like to make you believe, but rather there were many different factions in them. There was, of course, a very strong royalist faction, strong at least at first. Um, and then it went from there. How does Piotr Wrangel's life fit in that sort of narrative? Can you give us a little overview?
Yeah, sure. So the story will start at the beginning of World War I, and we'll sort of see the progression of the war of the front through the years 1914 through to 1916 and 17, and he he is a he's a loyalist to the Tsar uh, throughout the entire story, but he watches as people around him sort of develop these other worldviews, Republicans, Democrats,
Mm.
just alternative views. Um, and eventually we see the interior collapse under the stress of the war and the general incompetence of the ministers and everybody working under the czar,
Right.
trying to undermine his direction. Uh,
Let me get your opinion, since I am not a student of Russian history by any means, but would you there's many opinions about Tsar Nicholas II. You know, was
yeah,
he a good man? Was he a bad man? Was he just a weak man in a position where you just have to be a strong man, which is somewhat like what my position is, or was he, sort of half-assing reforms? Was he limited? Like, there's a lot of buzz about it, and of course, many armchair historians like myself, will have a different opinion about it. But how do you sort of see the czar?
uh, I don't think he was like a weak man in a strong man's position. I just think that he was maybe not good enough to deal with like the events that were set in motion like 100 years before he even took the throne.
Right.
Um,
I
they were
believe
kind of the
was
circumstances
sorry.
were sort of they were you'd have to be incredibly special to be able to respond to any of that
Yes.
as a monarch.
So would I be right in characterizing it as if he if he had been good enough for the times that he had been in, he'd be like a he'd be a truly great man. Is that kind of like what you're getting at?
Somewhat. I think that there were just some things beyond his control,
Mm.
like the death of Stolypin. Um,
I don't know who that is. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So after the 1905 revolution,
Mm.
where the protests, Bloody Sunday, where where like 300 people were killed outside of the Winter Palace by
Yes.
the Tsar's forces. That was the 1905. That was in the 1905 revolution, and after that, Stolypin enters the picture, and he starts. He becomes like a middleman between like the Tsar and the newly founded Duma,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's like
he's a chief minister essentially.
Yeah, like his communicator between like the throne and the people, and or the civilian government. And Stolypin came up with a long-term plan to reform Russia while still keeping the monarchical principle intact. And it was working for a good while, but Stolypin's whole thing was that the empire needed a good 20 years of peace for it to work. And depending on who you ask, his plan might not have worked anyway. Who knows? I think it might have.
But he wasn't given the chance to really risk it because of World War I, I'm assuming.
Yes, and also in 1910, Stolypin was assassinated by a socialist revolutionary terrorist.
Was there a Tsar that was assassinated in the same way?
Nicholas II's grandfather was.
There we go. Yes.
There was a bomb that exploded underneath his carriage. And that's one of the reasons Nicholas was not much of a reformer. Like he wanted to maintain the monarchy, like a conservative monarchy, and he did not give any like leeway to liberal social values or movements. Even though he had to make changes after 1905 and Stolypin. So under that plan, under Stolypin's plan, a lot of things changed. Now it's been a while since I've done my research on these changes. There's some of these that were already underway before Stolypin, but they started opening public schools and modernizing their healthcare. They made it so that healthcare was actually free and funded by the government. They had like a sort of socialized healthcare in the empire, and they had ambulances and stuff like that. The literacy rate climbed to about 80% by the end of or by the beginning of World War I, which the Bolsheviks kind of took credit for. The USSR took credit for after they took over.
Well, that was his first mistake, letting the peasants read. You're just over when that happens. It's just done.
I guess so. But like that's another misconception, I think, is like that it was a popular revolution of the people. Even though the people obviously participated, I think they were manipulated into doing so.
So were the French people in the French Revolution, and whatever you want to say, whichever side you are on this or that revolution. It's like, look, most peasant societies were not the English middle class during Charles I's reign. You know what I mean? Like, they weren't mostly well-educated with plenty of stuff going on for them. They were peasants. And especially in Russia, where they were double peasants.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, okay, so in Nicholas's reign, very early on, I think they had they had begun already transferring a lot of land to the peasantry. Like peasants were beginning to become landowners themselves, and they had a sort of program in place for peasants to basically take loans to buy land.
Right.
And some of these peasants got very wealthy, and they became known as kulaks.
Oh yes.
Yeah. I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, the reforms. What was I talking about before? I was talking about the.
We were talking about that one fellow who was doing the reforms, but I was sort of like trying to set the stage for your comic so that they'd have a context.
Oh right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So Stolypin dies, and that kind of leaves his grand plan for reform without a helmsman.
Yeah.
But Nicholas was going to try to complete it regardless of Stolypin's death. But that kind of all flies out the window with World War One. That kind of ruins everything. And things don't go well on the home front. They don't go well on the war front. The person that Nicholas put in charge as the war minister caused a lot of trouble. There weren't a lot of supplies that were able to get to the front, so soldiers were running into combat without any bullets or weapons, sometimes no shoes. Like after a couple of years of fighting, they just didn't have enough supplies to account for that. They all thought it was going to be over in 6 months.
Yes.
Wrangel fights through all of this. He's a cavalry officer, a captain of one of the squadrons of the Lifeguards Horse Regiment. It's a very prestigious regiment. And we see that we go through this in the comic. It's not in the original memoir. The memoir picks up in 1916, but I'm using extra material. Like I said, his son did write an account of his first battle, so that will be included in the comic. So we'll see him go through that. We'll see him go through 1916, where they fought in the Carpathians. People froze to death in the trenches. They were like they looked like terracotta soldiers standing up like statues, frozen. We'll go through the decline of the government and the first revolution at the hands of Kerensky and Guchkov, who put into place like the provisional government after forcing the Tsar to abdicate, which collapses pretty shortly after it's founded, because Lenin and Trotsky, they're let loose in Russia by Germany, and they overthrow this now weakened government without a czar, and they put into place their own guys. That's where like the Bolshevik Revolution began. And Wrangel reacts to this. He was fighting under the provisional government under Kerensky, even though like it's sort of like, not his will to do so, but it is his country, so he continues.
Yes.
But after the Bolsheviks take over, he leaves the army. He asks to be discharged, and he flees to the Crimea to live with his family, and eventually he joins up with some loyalists who are putting together their own army to resist the Bolshevik threat. And so he joins them. He fights with them for a while. He works with them to like amass more forces, trying to convince like the Cossacks to join up with them. But eventually, we all know how the story ends. The White Army fails, the Reds win. Wrangel is forced to flee overseas. The Tsar is killed along with his entire family. But like what the focus is of the comic, I suppose, what the lesson you're going to be taking away from this, what the theme is just we see the White Army fall apart, and like not able to achieve its goal because of all the infighting. People wanting to achieve their own personal glory or stick to their own little personal ideologies, because the White Army wasn't just made up of czarists. You did have socialists within the White Army. You had Democrats and Republicans and all sorts of people coming from different places. None of them could agree on how to get the job done. Nobody wanted to really work. Some people didn't even believe that they would win. They just wanted to die fighting.
Right.
And so that caused a lot of trouble. And Wrangel witnesses it all firsthand, and even becomes like a target of one of these generals who's actively sabotaging the war effort due to his own doomerisms. And it's all very intriguing. So it's just it's about men who aren't able to get over their own pet ideologies and their egos in order to accomplish something for the greater good. That's kind of the lesson that one can take away from the memoir, and also hopefully the comic will communicate that as well.
Well, it's certainly a lesson for the modern day, because there's, how do I want to put it? Like, I don't know how active you are on Twitter, but I'm sure you've seen Alaric the Goth and a few others and myself talk about these Muslims all of a sudden bursting forth. They've always been in the background of oh hey, don't you know Sufism is the true trad perennial nationalist whatever something, and of course absolutely not. If you said half of these words to Charlemagne, he would have no idea what you're talking about and would immediately start considering having you executed. But the actually, how about that for a standard? What would Charlemagne think of this?
Right.
But we're supposed to take some dude on the internet who looks like Liver King seriously?
Yeah.
No. I barely take Bronze Age perverts seriously, and I like his jokes.
He doesn't even want to be taken seriously. So
right. So it's like like what we need to like what's the purpose? What are we supposed to do then? Oh, my dude, we are supposed to hike our trousers up and get to the work, and not listen to some grifter who's who cares who he's paid by. Who wants to divide you over the subject matter of a bikini or the Quran or anything like that.
Yeah, what flavor of right wing should prevail in the end? It's like we can deal with that later.
Yes.
One.
When we can divide up again once our enemies are dead or something. Us patriots in control, don't you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually, as a quasi-private matter, but not. I'm actually talking to my pastor about, all right, if I'm a Christian and I'm not supposed to be of the world, but I know that men like Cromwell and Joan d'Arc and all these other people were certainly instruments of God's wrath or his freeing of a people or, whatever you want to insert. And I figure that even though he failed. Even though Pietro Wrangel did not succeed in his aims and ambitions, he certainly seems to be more on the side of Christians than the communists.
Yeah.
What is the Christian's place there? I'm tired of I'm tired of Bronze Age pervert. Not really, but I'm tired of these different opinions. What is the most biblical opinion I can have, and how in the world can I fight or produce art or, promote other artists like yourself in a way that glorifies God, as well as promote, sort of quote unquote, the ambitious nature of the world.
Right. Well, I've always interpreted the the saying of like be not of the world. I've always understood the world to mean the passions.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if I'm correct in that. Like that's it's been a while. Um, but in
The
regards to like your
appetites, the
question
slop.
about yeah, the appetites, the slop, the urges. Um, but in regards to your what you said about how are you supposed to fight as like a Christian? How are you supposed to like take up a fight for a cause, a worldly cause, seemingly? There's a book I've been working through in preparation for the book or for the comic called "On Resistance to Evil by Force" by Ivan Alexandrovich Ilyin.
What a name.
More for an orthodox ethos, but they're not too dissimilar from us Catholics. So I think that'd be a pretty good read for anybody with
I
that
must
same
not
question.
deceive you, though. I am not a Catholic. I am a Protestant. A filthy
That's
low
fine
church
by me.
Protestant. Okay, good. That's right. That's
I'm the
right.
Catholic here.
Oh, I see. Yeah, well, I mean, I think it would be good
I
for
will
anybody.
Yes,
to read.
absolutely.
Yeah. I will say, I think I would separate. I've just been thinking over what you're saying. First off, I've let Ben do most of the talking because you need to understand, Alex, the way that we run these shows is 5 minutes before we go on, I go, "What are we doing today?" And Ben tells me if we have a guest. Uh,
Sometimes we plan ahead. Don't be like
sometimes we
that.
plan ahead.
And
That's true.
sometimes I let you plan ahead.
Yes. So I learned about this I'm not lying though. Like I just learned about this. It looks extremely cool and like the sort of thing that I would like. So don't get me wrong. I'll probably be getting it now that I know about it, but I just learned about it. With that said, I've been chewing on some of what was said here. I would think that I would not identify the world with the passions, and this is why. So classically, Christians, and this is biblical, of course, Christians have recognized three causes of temptation. And St. Paul identifies them as the world, the flesh, and the devil, right?
Mhm.
So the devil is obvious. It's a literal spiritual being that is trying to tempt us into evil. But the world and the flesh do take some unpacking. I would identify the passions with the flesh, I think, because they are what arises from uh, our bodies, right? The
Mm-hmm.
temptations that arise from being in a fallen body is
I
how I
see.
would put it. Uh, so the temptation of the world is that temptation to material things uh, that distract us from spiritual goods, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
at least that's how I've classically understood it. Mostly, I would say that you're right to talk about the appetites as things that can distract us. But I think that would fall under the flesh, right? So our bodies are good, and we know this because when we rise, we're going to rise in our bodies, and they will be glorified. Uh, and Jesus Christ had a body. So God had a body, therefore body can't be bad, right? And God made our bodies, and He said they were good, in Genesis, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the body itself is not bad. That's the Gnostic heresy that it is.
Yes. Of course.
What was that?
I said yes, of course.
Right. So that's a given. However, we live in a fallen world, and because we live in a fallen world, the proper nature of our body is corrupted. Uh, so that is what causes bodily temptations.
Mm-hmm.
Lust is the most obvious. Gluttony is also on that list, and various things of that. But there's also the passions, the appetites, right? The things that we crave that are disordered because we either crave too much or too little. All of the seven deadly sins or the seven capital vices, which is the term I prefer, because it's more precise. All of the 7 capital vices are really just, they are virtues stretched, right? Stretched or shrunk is how I would describe it. So lust, for example, lust in itself, Lewis identifies it in the great, C.S. Lewis, I mean, identifies in The Great Divorce with passion, right?
Yeah.
So it's a distorted passion. Gluttony is, love of filling your belly, of feeling satisfied and satiated, and it's a misidentification of that feeling of satisfaction. This is something that I'm thinking of right now, but all of them can be done in certain ways, right? Pride is not necessarily like, when we talk about having pride in your country or something like that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's when it becomes disordered, it becomes a sort of pride at the expense of, right?
Right.
So where I'm going with all of this is to say that I think when we talk about the temptation of the world, which is what Ben was trying to ask, right? What Ben was trying to figure out. And I'm working through all of this with you, right? If I'm coming off as lecturing, I'm not trying to. I'm thinking it out.
No, go ahead. I'm no big thinker or anything.
I'm cook. Yeah. Uh, anyway, I am thinking it out on the fly, like all of you, right? So I'm not lecturing. I'm thinking it over. I think when you think of like the temptations of the world and that question of how can we not be of the world when so many great Christian saints, essentially, right, and great Christian men and leaders affected the world in such profound ways. And I think it comes to the ultimate motivation. Joan of Arc, I had this discussion with Ben actually in the Superversive Discord, right? The reason that this movie that Hollywood is coming out with about Joan of Arc is going to fail, which it absolutely will. Right? The new Baz Luhrmann one that they're advertising everywhere. It's going to be a complete disaster. Why is it going to be a complete disaster? Well, I can speak pretty coherently on this because, as Ben knows, Joan of Arc is a special interest of mine. No, I'm not autistic. Shut up. Anyway, no, Joan of Arc, like, it really was a passion of mine for a while, though. Read multiple biographies on her, did a ton of research into Joan of Arc, right?
Right.
And the reason that this movie is going to fail is because you could tell already by the way that they talk about it, they fundamentally miss Joan of Arc's motive in what she's doing.
Yeah, they're
So
gonna make her a girl boss or something.
they're going to make her a girl boss, right? But it raises the question of, why did Joan of Arc do what she did? Did she do it for France? Did she do it for her king? Did she do it for her own glory? Right? Did she do it to fight the system? I think that some of those are closer to true and some of those are further to true, right? Certainly she was intensely loyal to her king. Almost like loyal to an extent that would make modern people uncomfortable because Charles was not a good king. Was it Charles? I'm blanking on the name. Wow. It was Charles. Okay. Yeah, thank you. He was not a good king, right? He was an incredibly lucky king. Probably the luckiest king of all time. But he was not a good king, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And she certainly loved France and spoke glowingly about France. So certainly that was part of her motivation as well. However, I don't think that those are quite right either, because lots of people in her time period loved France and loved the king and didn't do what Joan did, right? So that can't be the extent of it. It's like when I was having a conversation about like Mother Cabrini, who started orphanages in America and around the world, a massive orphan system and helping people around the world, right? And you go, why did she do it? And you go, well, she really liked kids. I mean, okay, I like kids. I know people who like kids, right? Like, I'm not doing that. Why did she do it? Right? And the answer is the same for both of them. They did it because they believed that God wanted them to. That's it. That's the answer. Like, what does not being of the world mean? It means that you're motivated not by love of glory, not by love of power, not even by love of country or love of king, but by love of God.
Right.
Hmm. That's a good
So
answer.
go ahead then.
Yeah.
But go on. I think you were about to say something, Alex.
Uh, no, I don't. I don't remember.
Fair enough. And that's a good answer. I quite like it. Uh, this is, I find it difficult because I'm always looking both for motivation to write, and then I see other people whose motivations are different, and then I see, I always get drawn into different debates. My biggest, of course, concern is quality. Like you said, you're a Catholic. When you, Mr. Wisner, when inked always with honor, when you drew out every piece, you know, some Christians I've met, they're absolute prayer warriors. If they're hammering in nails on a house, they've said a prayer with every blow. Or at least they say they do, but I'm sure they do. Um, you know, I'm not going to cast aspersions or anything like that. But did you, pray over every incline, or did you, at least say, hey, Lord, give me the inspiration I need to make this a great piece?
I did at the beginning, not over every line, but like I have generally prayed about the project in general and given thanks whenever it's shown success.
Mm.
Um,
And of course, I bring this up to say, this is a very Christian way to do things. Perhaps if the white Christians, sorry, the white Russians, who were generally Christian, if I recall correctly, if they had
yeah, a
perhaps,
lot of them were.
yes, um, I still remember that one guy who ran off to be a Mongolian. Uh,
Oh yeah, Sternberg. He's in the comic.
Yes. I'll look forward to seeing his scenes. Um, I don't really recall him being Christian or not, but
No.
these men who who pursued their own ambition, they certainly had a disordered view of it. They had a view where they weren't putting God first. Would God say, "Hey, you as a man are given responsibility over nations, over people, over soldiers. You must, treat it properly. You must be a good steward of it." Jesus is very clear. Whatever people may say about ambition and the world and the temptation of the world, if you are a bad steward, God is displeased. Um, he in one of the parable of the talents, the guy who just put it into a ditch, and hid it without even getting interest out of it. Um, God has some very harsh words to say. He's going to be tortured for eternity. Um, or similar. I believe it's like weeping and gnashing of teeth. Uh, if they had been good stewards of it, perhaps, we wouldn't have had, 100 years of the USSR. But then again, it may have been God's will that we have this sort of thing happen. For reasons better than what we can understand even in 1,000 years. Um, I think there was some Catholic, or was it Evola or something like that. It's like, well, what do you think about this? And it was like Charlemagne or something, and he goes, "It's too soon yet." It's been 1,000 years. What do you
Yeah.
mean?
Right.
Uh, I wish I could remember the quote offhand. But it's thinking about stuff like this. The reason why I want to support comics like yours, and the reason why I want to talk about this is to get these opinions, get these ideas, but also to support great projects like this. The Indiegogo is in the description. We've helped fund or at least promoted a lot of comics and a lot of not a lot of comics. I shouldn't say that. A lot of projects like this from Kursova, from yourself, from Brian Niemeyer, and we'll continue to do so. I suppose I'll push us forward for the next stuff. Uh, how would you say? How would you describe the character of General Wrangel?
Oh,
Uh, like how would we, not just how would we see him? I don't mean it like that, but rather in the sort of sense of his nature, his disposition on things.
I think he's the type of guy who he is like a regretful warrior and leader. Um, not in the sense that like I don't think he likes killing. You know, I don't think
Hmm.
he likes the idea of having to kill somebody. Um, but he is very like all about duty and service, and like he sees the necessity of war in defense of people.
Yes.
Um, but it's definitely I think something that is a regrettable fact of life for him.
Hmm.
Um, I think he's the type of guy who like deals out death very dispassionately, not out of anger or personal hatred, maybe. Like I'd say he's like a type of Christian man who at least tries to do that.
And you'd say he was a Christian?
Yeah, I think yeah, he was a Christian. Definitely was. He was Orthodox.
I gotcha. So was it like I suppose I'm sort of asking like was it a cultural thing to him, or did he take his faith seriously? Um, as an example, George Washington, was definitely a cultural Christian. I don't think anyone could debate that, but he took his faith seriously. We have paintings like him praying at Valley Forge. There's his personal letters. We might look at Thomas Jefferson, this crazy deist trying to cut Jews out of the Bible, but
Yeah.
then we compare him to George Washington, and we see where the faith of the founding fathers were. How would you rate him on that kind of scale?
Um, I don't know if I can say. Like, I feel like that
Hmm,
would be like a judgment that I can't make on him. He
I
doesn't.
gotcha.
He doesn't like. He doesn't emphasize it very much throughout his memoir. But he does mention going and like praying in church from time to time, or at least attending church.
Okay.
Um, but uh, I don't like. It might not have been as devout as the Czar. The Czar was always in everything that he said or did. He was always like mentioning God or uh, you know something like that.
I gotcha.
Uh,
I'm always
Yeah,
curious about it because it's like people bring up like Oliver Cromwell or something, and they wonder at this. But then it's like he describes in his own diaries. I mimic Bap, and I do like a great man of history sometimes, and
yeah,
he does. He talks about having like a moment of salvation, and I'm always curious when you have Christian characters of history, whether they describe themselves at it. Clovis going, oh, if my Franks were there, Jesus wouldn't have been crucified. Like even though it's not the right, it's not quite what was purpose of the crucifixion. I'm
right,
always curious about their views on it because these are men who we cannot comprehend in a way. They're leaders of nations, of armies. You
right.
know,
Yeah, I'd say. I mean, Wrangel. He's an Orthodox Christian man who attended mass every week.
nice.
So I don't I don't know how much he devoted his thoughts to it. Um, he doesn't really introspect a whole lot in the memoirs, like too much
I
about his
gotcha.
own like feelings on things like that. He'll briefly mention like his feelings on something.
I gotcha.
But it's not that common. I mean, he there was a part in the memoir where he gets I forget what he gets. He gets some like a pretty serious disease that he could have died from. He got really sick, and he glosses over it. He does not mention being in pain or
Hmm.
anything. he he's kind of matter of fact. Not that the memoir's overly dry or anything, but he just doesn't linger too long on things like that, or will skip over things that he might. I get the feeling that he doesn't like to be the guy who complains about things.
That's fascinating. It's very interesting to me because of these things. As an example, anyway.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me to hear that the czar, that God was never far from his lips, because let's say I can perhaps count on one hand favorable depictions of the czar, Nicholas II and his family.
Yeah, he's not very well liked by a lot of people, and I think that's due to Soviet propaganda just permeating everything for almost a century.
Well, and it's like I remember the Kingsman movie. Do you remember that at all?
I didn't watch it because I knew it would be slop. I knew like I saw like the Tsar was in it, and I think I saw Rasputin being like an evil wizard who's like mind controlling them and feeding everybody like opium or mind control juice. I don't know what that was, but it looked offensive to me. After I had read a whole lot about the Tsar, like his letters and people who like memoirs of people who knew him, and I saw that trailer and I was like, this just looks like it's gonna piss me off. I don't want to watch this.
Yes. And
I will say, oh, go ahead, Ben.
You in that case you probably made the right call, because I watched it, and I'll admit, you maybe missed it a bit, but I do enjoy slop on occasion, and that's bad of me.
I mean, sometimes you have your guilty pleasure slop things that you enjoy.
It's all slop.
Everybody has that some things that they like that they know is bad.
Yes.
But I also very much suspected that they would lean into like the Rasputin's affair with the Empress, which never happened. Famous. That's like one of the famous myths that stuck it out even after the archives opened. Is like the Empress cheating on the Tsar with Rasputin. It looked like the type of movie that would do something like that.
I think he actually addicted them to heroin.
Yeah, which is insane.
Yes, that part I never quite got.
Well, because like the rumor that was going around at the time was that like the royal family were under the control of Rasputin, that he was like a literal evil wizard that was like controlling their minds.
Yes.
And that's why a lot of people started turning on the Tsar. They thought that the Empress was a German spy because she was German born, and B, that Rasputin had too much influence over them and was literally a dark magician.
Right. And that's and that is science fiction of a sort. He was certainly a weird mystic of what was his group called the Christi or something like that.
There's speculation about him being part of like a cult. There's not really any definitive proof of it, I don't think. There are Rasputin apologists out there who will say that's a fiction invented by rumor mongers, and that he's actually an Orthodox saint. But I've not read enough into it to know what he was up to outside of the royal family anyway. I know that as far as the royal family went, he didn't really do anything. Like the Tsar was always kind of dismissive of him and only kept him around because he seemed to be able to heal his son's hemophiliac episodes.
Yes. And
the Empress wanted him around for that same reason. Really, really thought that he had some God-given ability to do that. And after reading accounts of these episodes. I can't really say if he did or not. I kind of lean towards that he did actually.
Yeah.
Um, because some of these instances were pretty inexplicable. They thought he was going to die. The doctor said he's going to die. He's bleeding internally, and there's nothing we can do. Rasputin shows up. He prays over him for a moment, and then he's fine. It seems pretty mystical to me.
Oh yeah.
But Rasputin wasn't present in the household that much. And the control he did have over the family was very limited. He only had a lot of like sway with the empress.
And really only when the son is sick, really.
Oh, yeah, really only when the son is sick. But she saw him as like a miraculous healer, and so like she liked to heed his advice whenever he'd send telegrams and stuff. And the Tsar would tell her like he should just like leave his nose out of this.
Right.
He doesn't know what it's like to rule a country.
He doesn't even bathe. Come on.
Yeah.
Supposedly.
Yes. But I don't know. I think Rasputin might get too much of a bad rap. I'm starting to think that. Especially after seeing what all the things that people say about the Tsar, like the bloody Nicholas, and he saw over the deaths of so many people on Bloody Sunday. He was, which he wasn't even there for.
Right.
He wasn't even present for that.
Well,
after that happened, he donated like 15,000 rubles of his own money to all the families, which in today's money is so much. It's so much money.
Well, people don't want to acknowledge this, but 9 times out of 10, when you hear about like this sort of massacre where like soldiers just start randomly firing, it's because the soldiers panicked.
Oh yeah, no, they definitely did. There's like a good account of.
Excuse me. Yes.
I don't know if it's available in English. But there are accounts of Bloody Sunday. You can go read about Father Capone, who's the guy who led the march onto the Winter Palace to deliver the demands of the workers onto the Tsar. And there was a lot of like violence or just like a lot of destruction of property on their way up because there were socialist revolutionary agitators among the crowd who had rifles and they would shoot out windows and like wreck storefronts and all this stuff. Even though there were like most of the people there were sincere and they just wanted the Tsar to like improve working conditions for them.
Right.
The demands in the actual letter penned up by Capone, they had like almost nothing to do with the workers. They demanded a lot of like changes be made in the government to like socialist or liberal policies. It's kind of insulting. And also Capone was a double agent for the Okhrana and knew that the Tsar wouldn't be there. And he kind of like played on that and was like, "Oh, I know something fucked up's about to happen if I take all these violent people up to the Winter Palace, and people will turn on the Tsar. People will do this. They'll hate him. They'll blame him for whatever tragedy happens."
I'm sorry. Who are the Okhrana?
The Okhrana were like the secret police, kind of.
Ah, I gotcha.
Yeah, they were like the guys who would go in and infiltrate socialist revolutionary cells. And dissolve them.
I gotcha. And there was only a few hundred of them anyway, so, or at least that's what I've heard. Well, yes,
there were quite a bit. I don't know exactly how many there were, but they had influence. They had their own like sort of like propaganda newspaper. Also, I don't know if you knew this, but the Bolsheviks not only were they funded by Germany, they were funded by bankers from Wall Street.
Classic maneuver.
If you look up Jacob Schiff, I think was his name. He was a Wall Street banker.
Probably.
Yep. Yeah. There's a New York Times article where you can read about him holding like a dinner to celebrate the revolution and like brothers, we finally did it.
Nothing like a banker saying "Workers of the world unite."
Yeah.
Pardon me, I shouldn't laugh, but it is a deep irony of life for these things.
It is,
Uh,
and unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to include something like that in the book. It'd be too tangential,
no.
but it is really funny. Uh, it's a really funny tidbit.
Well, it's one of those things where it's like, really, you don't need to talk about it, but having, how do I want to put it? Like, having just a newspaper title, in a battlefield wafting through the air will do
Yeah,
world wonders. Like, people are no longer subtle about things like that. And that's
yeah.
not even very subtle. It's not
It's not
subtext.
it's
It's
not very
just
subtle at all. And also, it would just be like, what would this be in a newspaper in Russian?
yeah,
Like, I wouldn't be able to do it, but maybe
yeah.
something to put in the back of a book where going over like neat little factoids or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. Uh, yeah. No, I absolutely I agree with you. Taking a look at the publisher here, Passage Press has been putting out a lot of great stuff recently. The very definition of anti-slop.
yeah,
Uh, excuse me, I touched my mic there. And of course, this is one of them. Have you worked with them before?
yeah. I worked with them on their HP Lovecraft collection.
Oh,
I
yes.
did. I did all the illustrations for volume 1 and 2.
Ooh.
They're going to be coming out with a second volume of that.
I
More
didn't know they
stories.
were illustrated. Um,
Yeah, I
because
think there are 11 illustrations in the first volume,
mm,
and
'cause
then I also worked with them on their reprints of the first three Hardy Boys books from 1927 in their original form, unedited, uncensored.
absolutely. You would not believe how much the younger Hardy brother just says every slur. Like this dude invents slur. No, I'm kidding. No, 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 no. I'm joking.
Yeah,
Um, did you know 90% of all American slurs can be traced down to Hardy Boys number one? It's why they don't print it anymore.
it's true.
Uncensored. It's
It's
true.
true.
Yes, don't you
Yeah,
know?
they've I think they've edited those stories several times over the years. They've changed them quite a bit. So Passage wanted to
Mm.
make the original versions available again.
I'm not.
Uh,
I can't even think that there would be anything really offensive into it. It
Apparently, there were.
uh, huh. Huh. Well, all right then. Uh, I'm kind of curious now. I might look into that one.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's
I know they.
available in like a box set, I think now.
Yeah, they also did a Conan the Barbarian one, which I am
Yep.
going in and out on eyeing, but I've got a decent Conan collection that the giant book one that Barnes and Noble sold for a bit.
Yeah.
I've got one of those, and it does look good on a shelf. Uh,
Awesome.
but I'm thinking
Yeah.
about it.
They're I think they're planning on doing a lot more pulp stuff.
Mm.
Because I think they started out doing like sort of right wing like
Nick
theory type
Land.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So now they're getting into like pulp, like just stories for it, like that anybody could enjoy.
Mm.
You know,
I,
uh,
I like
in
it.
comics. Yeah, yeah. It's cool. I love that they're doing that.
I do get a little worried because I'm a big supporter of Castalia House. We're a big fan of well, I wouldn't say big fan, but we're a fan of Vox Day here. Um, and of course, I've got quite a few of the library volumes that he sells for 2 months gets you 50 a month gets you one of them.
Right.
And they're quite beautiful volumes. But I only have so much budget for and time and energy for advanced copies. So I hope it doesn't turn into too much of an industry among friends. Otherwise, I'll be driven to the pauper's house.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope. I hope. I mean, the more demand there is for stuff like this, I mean, the aim is to get it to get it out there, to like spread it around,
Absolutely.
not keep it too insular. Yeah, but it depends on the audience for that to happen.
Yeah. No, there's one of the strategies that was very successful for the left is ghettoizing.
Mm-hmm.
So like Castalia House, especially after Sad Puppies, was a very big ghetto, but it was a ghetto. And so I'm seeing that always kind of like show up, especially since people weren't always there were some feuds and stuff like that that no longer really need to be remembered, um, except when they show up again. So it's like I hope that Passage Press, which is of the Passage Prize, stays unghettoized because it has a very broad appeal.
I think, I think so. I think, the goal is to like have broad appeal and not let itself get bogged down in any sort of like drama or fighting between anybody, or don't want to be like too exclusive. Want to try to make stuff that theoretically anybody can enjoy. Just something beautiful,
and of high quality, like between not between you and me, but but like between me and myself. If I looked at your comic and I said, kind of shit, I wouldn't spend money on it. I've got the I do have a physical. I can't remember exactly because it's been a couple weeks, but I do have one of the physical copies coming my way. And that's it looks great. It looks good. Great art. I've got the link in chat for people to check out. And that's the important thing. Like in the end, whatever things happen with reach and arguments, and are you Sufi today, brother? Are you perennialist enough to be on this?
Yeah. I mean,
sorry.
And thank you for like supporting the project. Thank you for like backing it, and thank you for like having me on to promote it. If you're even like remotely like conservative, you don't even necessarily have to be conservative or right wing to like get in on this stuff. You just got to make something good, something that's not slop, I guess. Yes. I mean, it can be a little sloppish if you want.
Well, there's a time and place for slop.
There's a time and place for slop.
I'm a horror writer. Guess what? There's more slop than I'd like to admit in my work, but I always serve it in dedication to horror and gratuitous violence and stuff like that.
That's part of pulp, and pulp has its place. I'd say like slop is just like something slop. It's just like completely constituted of slop and like just worthless nothing. Yeah. If you got a little bit of slop flavoring, there's no problem there, really.
Oh no, and I've just been amused by that term since it's come up. But no, why don't listen? You've been a wonderful guest. Thank you for coming on and promoting your work. Do you have any final words for us as we go into the last few minutes?
Everybody watching this, buy my book 5 times. Buy them for your family and your friends, and get yourself multiple different copies just to have for you.
Absolutely.
Just give me a lot of money. Give me so much money. I need money.
Listen, what you need to do is you need to get a cabin in the woods, and you need to write a manifesto. And for every manifesto you mail out to the general public, you need to attach one of these comics. All right?
I agree. I think that's
the
right way to go about things.
All right. Sorry, I'm cooking something and it's smelling more and more delicious, and I'm getting more and more hungry. So I must thank you for coming in. I'm looking forward to the physical edition that's coming out towards me eventually.
Of course.
And of course, I will look forward to your work in the future. I will. Yeah, I'm following you and Passage Press and all this jazz.
Awesome.
I'll certainly know about it. And maybe we'll speak again for the nice 2 hours we usually try to do. Anthony,
Of
do you
course,
have...
I'd be up for that.
Oh, absolutely. Anthony, do you have anything for us?
Not really. I'll probably pick up the comic, however.
Awesome, thanks.
I want to apologize to those who are suffering from whiplash from our change in direction, but I do think you will enjoy it. Always pursue the quality, my lads. Quality will not let you down, no more so than God our Savior lets us down, and that is to say, He never lets us down. Have a good one.
Thank you for having me on. See ya.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Alex.